Medical residents learn to write everything down. Not because anyone tells them to, because the things you don't write down have a way of becoming the things you can't prove. And in a first year that felt like being underwater in slow motion, Priya Kapoor had learned that the only thing standing between her and complete professional obliteration was the small blue notebook she kept in her left scrub pocket. She wrote down everything: dosages, attending preferences, the specific way Dr. Vale liked his instrument trays arranged, which she had learned on her third day and never needed to reference again because she had written it down twice. She wrote down the things that confused her, the things that impressed her, the things she observed and couldn't yet explain and needed to sit with until they resolved into understanding or didn't. She had been writing things down since, or for. That was 11 days ago. The notebook was almost full. She sat in the residence lounge at 0612 on a Wednesday morning, the notebook open on the table in front of her, her cold coffee beside it, running through what she had written about that morning for the fourth time. Not because the words had changed, because she was still hoping they would resolve into something she could categorize, and they hadn't, and she was beginning to suspect they weren't going to. She had written, in her precise, small handwriting, Montoya, E., Scrub Tech, Department 7. Posterior transverse sinus approach. Direct digital compression plus horizontal mattress suture, simultaneous. Both hands, chest cavity, under time pressure. Rhythm, 3-0 proline, loaded before announcement. Preloaded. She knew before she moved. And below that, call sign, Angel 6. Patient, no ID. Hands, field callus pattern, right thumb webbing. Wound, posterior LV, non-standard. Technique, classified training document, residency orientation, field observations in austere combat environments. No author, no date. And below that, underlined twice. Not similar. Identical. Priya closed the notebook. She picked up the cold coffee. She drank it without tasting it. She was a first-year surgical resident. She was supposed to be learning how to close wounds in present patients and survive the specific, grinding endurance test of the first year without making an error that killed someone. She was not supposed to be sitting in the residence lounge at 0612 with a notebook full of observations that she had no clinical reason to have made and no institutional channel through which to report them. She opened the notebook again. Foster D., Hospital Administrator. Hire Montoya. Hired Okonkwo. ICU charge, 2 years. Check others. She had added that 3 days ago, after a conversation with Grace Okonkwo in the fourth-floor corridor that had lasted approximately 45 seconds and had contained, in those 45 seconds, more information than most conversations she had in a week. Not because Grace had said anything specific, because of the way Grace had looked at her, the specific, assessing look of someone who was deciding how much to confirm rather than whether to. Priya had written, "She knows I know. She's deciding what to do about it." She still didn't know what Grace had decided. She closed the notebook again. She put it in her left scrub pocket. She went to work. Dr. Marcus Vale was in a mood. This was not unusual. Vale was frequently in a mood. The moods varied in their specific texture. There was the mood of a man who had slept badly, which expressed itself as clipped efficiency and a tendency to find fault with instrument placement. There was the mood of a man who had received news he didn't like, which expressed itself as a particular brand of cold politeness that was somehow worse than the clipped efficiency. And there was the mood, which Priya had only observed twice before this morning, of a man who was processing something that had disturbed his fundamental understanding of how the world worked. That was the mood today. She noticed it at rounds. The way he paused slightly longer than usual before speaking. The way his eyes moved through the room with a quality she could only describe as recalibrating, as if the room's contents were the same, but the context for understanding them had shifted. She had written after or for. Vale stepped back. His feet moved before his decision did. She had watched him every shift since, watching for the recalibration, documenting it. Kapoor. He stopped at the nursing station where she was reviewing a post-op chart. He said her name the way he said most things, as a statement rather than an address, as if the word itself was a test she was expected to pass by responding correctly. The patient in room 7 needs his drain output reassessed. The night resident documented it incorrectly. Fix it. Yes, sir, she said. He started to walk away. Then he stopped. He turned back. He looked at her for a moment with the specific quality of someone who wants to say something and has not yet decided whether saying it will cost more than not saying it. The procedure, he said, in or for 11 days ago. He kept his voice level, the level of someone exerting control over a variable they find uncomfortable. You were observing. Yes, she said. What did you write in that notebook? She looked at him. Clinical observations. Standard resident documentation. He held her gaze for a moment. She held his back. She had been practicing this, the specific, steady eye contact of someone who is not going to look away first, which she had observed in Elena Montoya and Grace Okonkwo and Teresa Vasquez, and had decided was a skill rather than a personality trait, and could therefore be learned. Keep your observations clinical, Kapoor, Vale said. This hospital has enough complications without residents generating additional ones. He walked away. Priya waited until he was through the double doors. Then she took out the notebook and wrote, Vale knows I was watching. He's worried about what I saw. He said complications, not errors, not concerns. Complications. That's administrative language. He's already thinking about exposure. She put the notebook away. She went to reassess the patient in room 6. The man appeared in the corridor at 13:47. Priya was returning from the cafeteria. She had 11 minutes before her next case and had used 8 of them acquiring a sandwich she was going to eat in 4 minutes, because that was the math of a first-year surgical resident's lunch, when she became aware of him. Not because he announced himself. He didn't. He was standing near the surgical wing entrance in civilian clothes, dark jacket, no tie, shoes that were too practical for a pharmaceutical rep and too expensive for maintenance. And he was looking at the board. The surgical scheduling board, which listed the day's cases and the attending surgeons and the room assignments. He wasn't reading it the way visitors read boards. He was reading it the way people read boards when they already know what they're looking for and are confirming rather than discovering. She walked past him. She felt his gaze shift to her as she passed. The specific, brief assessment of someone cataloging new information, and then shift away. She did not look back. She took out the notebook. She wrote, 13:47. Surgical wing entrance. Male, approximately 45. Civilian clothes, federal build. Reading the board like he owns it. Not a visitor. Not a rep. Looking for something specific. She put the notebook away. She ate the sandwich in 3 minutes 40 seconds. She went back to work. He found her at 15:21. She was in the corridor outside the resident's workroom, reviewing imaging on her tablet, when she became aware of footsteps behind her with the specific quality, pace, weight distribution, the particular deliberateness of someone who knows exactly where they're going and has decided to arrive there without announcing the intention, that she had been cataloging for 11 days in the people who moved through Meridian General with that quality. She turned before he reached her. He stopped. Something moved in his expression, a fractional recalibration, the same one she had been documenting in Vale. She was beginning to recognize it as the specific micro-expression of someone who encounters a person paying more attention than they expected. He was the man from the corridor. Up close, the federal build was more apparent. The posture, the way he held his jacket, the specific contained quality of someone who was accustomed to rooms where what you didn't say was as important as what you did. Dr. Kapoor, he said. Not question. A confirmation. Yes, she said. He reached into his jacket and produced an identification card. He held it out. She looked at it. She looked at the name, the agency, the division. She handed it back. She did not write anything down. She was going to remember this. "I'd like a few minutes," he said. "Somewhere private." She looked at the corridor around her. At the surgical wing, with its glass walls and its continuous traffic of residents and attendings and nursing staff. At the residents' workroom, which had a door that closed and a window that looked out onto the nursing station rather than the corridor. "This way," she said. She led him to the workroom. She opened the door. She let him enter first, because she had learned, in 11 days of paying very close attention to people who had been in rooms where the stakes were high, that you did not put your back to a door you hadn't assessed. And then she entered and closed the door behind her. He looked at the notebook in her left scrub pocket. She looked at him looking at it. "You've been watching," he said. "I'm a resident," she said. "I watch everything." "Since or for?" "Yes." He sat down in one of the workroom chairs, not the one nearest the door, the one that gave him sight lines to both the door and the window, which told her something about his training. She sat across from him. She did not take out the notebook. She kept her hands on the table where he could see them, because she had observed that people who were accustomed to high-stake environments responded to visible hands the way civilians responded to direct eye contact, as a signal of non-threat. "What did you see in or for?" he asked. She looked at him for a moment. "What do you already know?" she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. The structural ancestor of one. The acknowledgement of an unexpected thing. "More than most people in this hospital," he said. "Less than you, apparently." Priya looked at the window, at the nursing station beyond it, where the afternoon shift was running its standard rhythms, entirely unaware of the conversation happening in the residents' workroom. She thought about 11 days of notes, about not similar, identical, about Vale's word, complications. "Elena Montoya," she said. "Scrub technician, Department 7. She performed a posterior transverse sinus approach to repair a left ventricular wound using direct digital compression and a horizontal mattress suture placed simultaneously with the compression hand. She preloaded the needle driver before she announced her intention to intervene, which means she had assessed the situation and made her decision before she moved." She held his gaze. "The technique is described in a classified military medical training document I reviewed during residency orientation. The document attributes the technique to field observations with no individual author. The movements I observed were not similar to that description. They were identical, which means she is the author, which means someone removed her name from her own work." The workroom was very quiet. "And," he said, "and the patient had no identification," Priya continued. His hand callus pattern was consistent with extended weapons and rope work. His wound was a non-standard entry pattern inconsistent with the reported mechanism of injury. He used a military call sign to ask for Montoya before he lost consciousness, which means he knew her from a context that predated this hospital. She paused. "And Colonel Diane Foster hired Montoya. Foster also hired Grace Okonkwo, ICU charge nurse, who has a clinical skill set that significantly exceeds her documented training. And Margaret Holloway, flight nurse, who runs an expanded pre-flight check that isn't in her role description and whose burn scars are consistent with aircraft fire survival." Another pause. "I think Foster has been building something in this hospital for at least 3 years. And I think, or 4 was the moment it stopped being invisible." The man across from her was very still. "You've been busy," he said. "I'm a resident," she said again. "I write everything down." He looked at the notebook in her pocket for a long moment. Then he looked at her. "Dr. Kapoor," he said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to understand that what I'm about to say changes your situation in this hospital significantly." A pause. "You are currently the only person in Meridian General who has documented, in writing, a comprehensive account of what happened in or for and its connections to the broader network operating within this institution." He held her gaze. "That makes you very valuable to the people I work for. It also makes you very inconvenient to the people they're investigating." Priya looked at him. She thought about Vale's word. Complications. She took out the notebook. She opened it to a fresh page. "Start from the beginning," she said. She was a first-year surgical resident. She was supposed to be learning how to close wounds and survive the first year without killing anyone. Instead, she was sitting in the resident's workroom across from a federal agent who had just told her that the notebook in her left scrub pocket made her both valuable and inconvenient, and that the difference between those two things depended entirely on what happened next. She had 11 days of notes. She had documented 3 hidden veterans, 1 hospital administrator with a classified military background, and 1 technique that shouldn't exist in any civilian hospital. She had been paying attention when nobody thought she was watching. Now someone was watching her. The question, the one that made her grip the pen slightly harder than usual, was whether the people who found her valuable and the people who found her inconvenient were going to arrive in that order. His name was Reeves. Not his real name. He said this without apology, as a statement of operational fact, the way you state things that are simply true and require no elaboration. He worked for a federal oversight body that she was not going to find on any public organizational chart. He had been investigating the network operating within Meridian General for 4 months. He had known about Elena Montoya for 2 of those months. He had not known about Grace Okonkwo or Margaret Holloway or the full scope of what Colonel Foster had built until 11 minutes ago, when Priya had told him. From her notebook, "You understood what you were looking at faster than anyone we've put in proximity to this network," Reeves said. He was not saying it as a compliment. He was saying it as information. "The people we've had watching this hospital have been here longer than you and documented less." They weren't watching the right things, Priya said. What were they watching? Transactions, communications, the things you look for when you're looking for a network. She looked at the notebook. "I was watching people, the way they moved, the way they held instruments, the specific quality of attention they brought to situations that other people found chaotic." She paused. "You find networks by watching transactions. You find the people inside networks by watching how they inhabit rooms." Reeves looked at her for a long moment. "How old are you?" he said. 28. "How long have you been a resident?" 11 months. He looked at the notebook again. The classified training document. The one from your orientation. "Do you remember the exact designation?" She told him. He wrote it down. He did not use a notebook. He wrote on his palm with a pen, which she found interesting and filed away. "The document is part of what we're investigating," he said. "The technique it describes, the one you observed Montoya perform, was developed in the field by a Special Forces medical sergeant whose records were subsequently classified and sanitized. Her name was removed from her own work. The technique was distributed through military medical training programs under a designation that credited no individual." He looked at her. "There is currently a congressional inquiry into the conduct of the task force she was attached to. The sanitized records are central to that inquiry." "Montoya," Priya said. "Yes. She knows. She knows now. She was contacted approximately 2 weeks ago. By the patient in or for." "Yes." Priya wrote something in the notebook. Then she looked up. "Foster," she said. "What does Foster know?" Reeves was quiet for a moment, the specific quiet of someone deciding how much to confirm. "Colonel Diane Foster, retired, has been building what we believe is a protected network of former Special Operations medical personnel embedded within civilian healthcare institutions," he said carefully. "The purpose of that network is not yet fully established. It may be protective, creating civilian cover for personnel whose operational histories make them targets. It may be something more active." A pause. "What we know is that she has been doing it for at least 3 years, in at least 2 institutions, and that Meridian General is the most developed node of the network we have identified." "She's hiding them," Priya said, "and keeping them useful." "That's one interpretation. It's the right one." She said it without hesitation. "I've watched these people for 11 days. They're not hiding from the work. They're hiding while doing the work. There's a difference." She looked at him steadily. Foster didn't recruit damaged people. She recruited people who needed a context in which to continue being who they were without the institutional weight of what they'd been before. Reeves looked at her for a long time. "You should have been a federal investigator," he said. "I'm going to be a surgeon," she said. "What do you need from me?" What he needed was the notebook. Not the physical notebook, a formal deposition, documenting everything she had observed in the precise, detailed language of a primary witness account. He gave her a secure contact. He gave her a timeline. He told her that her account, combined with the documentation recovered from the patient in or for, and the primary witness account that Margaret Holloway had provided to a separate inquiry, constituted the most comprehensive picture of the Meridian General network currently in existence. He told her that this made her valuable. He told her that this also made her a target for the people who did not want the network documented. "Who are those people?" she asked. "People with an interest in the specific task force records remaining classified," he said. "People who made decisions about what got sanitized and why. People who are currently aware that the inquiry is moving in a direction that implicates them." He held her gaze. "They know the inquiry is active. They don't know how much we have. Your account is the piece that connects the clinical evidence to the operational network. It's the piece that makes the rest of it coherent. So I'm the only witness, she said, to the specific intersection of events that connects or for to the broader network. Yes. Priya looked at the notebook in her hands. She thought about 11 days. About waking up at 0500 every morning with a notebook already in her hand, reviewing what she'd written the night before, adding the new observations, running the connections. She thought about the specific quality of attention that had made her notice things in or for that nobody else noticed. Not because she was smarter than the attending physicians and the senior residents who had been in that room, but because she had been watching differently, because she had been watching people rather than procedures. She thought about what Elena Montoya had said to her in the corridor 11 days ago. Someday, when someone asks where you learned that the standard approach isn't always the right approach, you tell them the truth. She thought about what the truth was. The truth was that she had been paying attention since her first day in this hospital. The truth was that she had written down everything she noticed about the people around her with the same systematic precision she brought to clinical documentation, because she had learned very early that people were as readable as patients if you knew what to look for. The truth was that, or for had not been a revelation. It had been a confirmation of things she had been accumulating for months without having a framework for understanding them. The framework had arrived with Elena Montoya setting down an instrument tray and walking to a table. I'll provide the account, she said. On one condition. Reeves waited. The people in this hospital, she said. Montoya, Okonkwo, Holloway. The others I haven't identified yet. Whatever Foster built, whatever the inquiry decides about its purpose and its legality, the people inside it are not collateral damage. They are people who have been doing genuine medical work in a civilian hospital. They have saved lives. Whatever happens with the network, that is documented accurately. Reeves looked at her. I can't guarantee outcomes, he said. I'm not asking you to guarantee outcomes, she said. I'm asking you to document accurately. There's a difference. He held her gaze for a long moment. Agreed, he said. She opened the notebook to the first page. She began. She finished at 1847. 3 hours and 26 minutes. 41 pages of the notebook, front and back, in her precise, small handwriting that Reeves had photographed page by page with a device that was not a phone and that she had noted and filed away. Every observation, every connection, every date and time and specific detail that she had been accumulating for 11 days with the systematic persistence of someone who had learned that the things you don't write down become the things you can't prove. When she finished, Reeves sat across from her for a moment without speaking. Then he said, There's one more thing. She waited. Vale, he said. Dr. Marcus Vale. He approached you this morning. Yes. What did he say? She told him. Exactly, word for word, because she had written it down within 4 minutes of the conversation ending. Reeves nodded slowly. He wrote something on his palm again. Vale has been in contact with one of the parties we're investigating. We believe it's incidental rather than deliberate. They approached him, not the other way around. But he's aware that something in this hospital is drawing federal attention, and he's trying to position himself appropriately. He told me to keep my observations clinical, Priya said. Yes, that's consistent with someone who has been advised to limit institutional exposure. He's protecting himself. Yes, not the network. No, Vale doesn't know enough about the network to protect it. He knows something unusual happened in his, and that it has attracted attention he doesn't understand and doesn't want. Priya thought about Vale stepping back from his own table, about his feet moving before his decision did. She almost felt sorry for him. Almost. She closed the notebook. She looked at Reeves. What happens now, she said. The inquiry continues, he said. Your account will be submitted through secure channels. You will continue your residency as normal. If anyone approaches you about or about the network, anyone, including people who present themselves as allies, you contact me through the secure channel before you respond. And Foster will be interviewed, when we're ready, by people who have read your account. Priya nodded. She stood. She put the notebook in her left scrub pocket, the same pocket it had occupied for 11 days, worn smooth at the corner from a specific friction of being taken out and put back several dozen times per day. She walked to the door. She stopped. Reeves, she said. He looked up. The technique, she said. The one in the training document. The one Montoya developed, and someone removed her name from. She held his gaze. Make sure the inquiry names it correctly. Make sure her name is on it. He looked at her for a moment. The congressional record will reflect the correct attribution, he said. The Montoya Protocol. Priya opened the door. She stepped out into the corridor, into the standard, continuous, unremarkable flow of a surgical wing in the middle of an afternoon shift, residents and attendings and nursing staff moving through the space with the focused, institutional efficiency of people doing their jobs. She walked to the residents' workroom. She sat down. She opened the notebook to a fresh page. She wrote, 1847. Reeves, federal oversight. For months on network. Doesn't know Foster's full scope. Thinks it's protective. He's right, but incomplete. Foster built something that was protection and continuity simultaneously, a way for people to keep being who they were without the weight of what they'd been. That's not a network. That's a second chance. She paused. Then she wrote, I'm going to need a bigger notebook. She writes everything down. This is what they see. What Vale sees, what the other residents see, what the attendings see when they notice the notebook. Always in the left scrub pocket. Always slightly worn at the corner. Always producing the specific, scratching sound of someone writing faster than the situation seems to require. They call her thorough. They call her diligent. They say she has good instincts for a first year, which is a specific compliment that senior physicians give to junior residents when they want to acknowledge something they can't yet fully explain. What they don't see, the pages that have nothing to do with clinical documentation, the observations about posture and gait and the specific quality of attention that certain people bring to rooms, the dates and times and connections that have been accumulating for 11 days into something that a federal investigator had just described as the most comprehensive picture of a classified network currently in existence. She is a first-year surgical resident. She is supposed to be learning how to close wounds. She is also, apparently, the only witness. She has decided these two things are not incompatible. The notebook goes in the left pocket every morning. It comes out dozens of times per shift. It goes back in. It gets fuller. The corner gets more worn. She writes everything down, because the things you don't write down have a way of becoming the things you can't prove. And Priya Kapoor intends to be able to prove everything. 3 days after the events of this episode, Priya Kapoor stopped Elena Montoya in the surgical corridor. Not to ask a question, she had stopped asking questions and started making statements, which was a shift she had noticed in herself and documented. She said, I gave a formal account to a federal investigator. Your name is in it. Correctly. Elena looked at her for a long moment. The look of someone receiving information they needed and had not expected to receive from this particular source. Thank you, Elena said. It was 2 words. It was also, in Priya's assessment, the most complete sentence Elena Montoya had spoken to her in 11 days. She wrote it down. She wrote, Montoya E. 2 words. Thank you. First time. Significant. Then she put the notebook away and went back to work. What the notebook eventually becomes, and what Priya does with what she knows, continues in episode 9, when Colonel Foster's door finally opens.